everyone, and welcome back. My name is Edshara, and the Tome Topple has ended, so today I'm sharing my wrap-up. So, my original Tome Topple TBR included Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell by Susanna Clarke, Children of Blood and Bone by Tome Topple, and Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. And I did not get to Children of Blood and Bone or Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell this round, but I did still end up reading two books, the first of which was a library hold that became available a little unexpectedly, but it was close enough to 500 pages that I decided to include it in the readathon, and it is Redeeming Love by Francine Rivers, and this is a retelling of the biblical account of the prophet Hosea and his wife Gomer, and Michael is Hosea in this book and Angel is Gomer. And I wasn't expecting it to be so intense right off the bat, but it did draw me in. But I will say I almost didn't make it out of the prologue because it was so intense and I wasn't expecting to have so many different emotions so soon into this book. So I will say be prepared if you do plan to give this a read. For the most part, I thought that the characters were really well done. Angel has had this very hard and brutal life, and yet I felt that the author was able to weave a lot of hope into this story, and I thought that the characters you were supposed to like were easy to like. The characters you were supposed to dislike were very easy to dislike. I also liked that the author had good and bad characters from both the Christian aspect as well as the non-Christian aspect. And I liked seeing how Angel interacted with all of the characters and how they responded to her. Michael was a very good, solid character. It was nice to see how he was able to love and care for Angel, even though she did everything in her power to keep him at a distance. I loved how this book is a perfect metaphor for God's love for us. I also wasn't really expecting to relate to a fictional prostitute who lived during the California Gold Rush era, but I found myself being able to identify with some of Angel's thoughts and feelings, and even understanding why she would return to, the negative experiences when they didn't really do anything for her in a positive way. I really had a few moments where I was like, I understand why she's doing that, or I get why she thinks that way, especially when you look and you read all of the things that happened to her during her life before she meets Michael and even after. So for the most part, the writing in this book was very well done, although I did have one very big issue, and that was when Michael began to explain his childhood to Angel. He mentioned one specific incident with his father where his father took some pretty horrific actions towards some slaves that he owned, and then later he did something else to another slave. It wasn't as horrific, but it was still evil, and he even told his son, hey, female slaves can be used how you wish. Now, with that said, Michael then goes on to defend his father, which I can understand, being a little bit defensive because that's your father and you love him, despite the fact that he wasn't a good man. But in his defense, Michael says, you know what, other than that first incident, my dad was a decent guy and he treated all of his other slaves pretty darn good. And to me, that dehumanized the slaves, and it made them, it kind of fit the twisted idea that, slaves weren't worth much. And you can interpret it how you want to, but how I felt, I didn't think that that was a statement or a stance that needed to be in a book that's supposed to be Christian fiction. And I feel that an author with this sort of platform and with a book that is this popular, that's definitely not something that I want to see. And I just felt that it could have been handled completely differently or left out altogether. And so after reading that, I did kind of have to step away from the story for a little bit. And even when I picked it up again, it took, you know, a couple of chapters to settle back in. So when I do finally write my review for this, I'm not really sure what my rating will be. I did enjoy the story as a whole, but I do think that the author still has to be held accountable for what she wrote. I will be interested in looking or reading more of Francine Rivers' works. I just will be a little bit more hesitant and more aware to see if that kind of thought process is included. But I will say this one was pretty good, other than that issue. And I was also able to read Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte, and this one I went into hesitant but excited at the same time. And I was hesitant just because it had been well over a decade since the last time that I read this book, and so I wasn't sure if my love for it was genuine or if it was more imagined. But I will say this book did live up to my expectations. It took a few pages to settle into the writing style, but after about 3 or 4 pages I was able to be really invested in the characters and what was going on. I was also able to see this book from a completely different perspective from the last 2 times that I read it in my teens and early 20s, and I was very happy about that. It's very interesting to see this author touch on a lot of topics that are still very relevant today. She touches on mental health and physical appearance, financial status, societal status. I found a lot of passages that I really enjoyed, so I did a lot of tabbing. I loved the writing style. She uses, you know, a lot of words to describe situations and settings, but I thought that it was so good. And I think if I were reading a book that was written today, I'd be like, oh my gosh, get to the point, you know, simplify it and move on. But I think because this book was written during the time period that it was nice to see how descriptive she was, and, you know, how the writing was so rich. Even I know that's a little bit cheesy, but that's just what it felt like. The writing was so rich, and it was so interesting to just see all of that, you know, kind of displayed within this book. Around chapter 12, I did kind of seek out the audiobook, and I was able to find the audiobook on the Hoopla app, and I would highly recommend it if your library has the Hoopla app, to check it out to see if you can find it, because it made for a very it made the reading experience even better than it already was, especially the way that the narrator was able to kind of distinguish the different characters. So it was very nice to listen to Jane and Mr. Rochester's interactions. I really enjoyed the book from that standpoint as well. So I'd highly recommend both the book and the audiobook. And if you don't think you can sit down and read this, maybe give the audiobook a try. But I'm so glad that I reread this, and this is definitely going to be a 5-star read once I write a review. As for the challenges, I ended up completing the first challenge, which was to read more than 1 tome, and I completed the 5th challenge, which was to read an adult novel. For the most part, I completed the majority of the Instagram challenges. I only missed 1 day, but I did have so much fun kind of creating all of the different pictures for each challenge. And I do think that I'm going to try to be a little bit more consistent with my Bookstagram account because I had so much fun, and I was able to meet more people through that as well. I love the Tome Topple readathon. It's probably one of my favorite readathons. It's definitely one that I will participate in again, and it's also one that I would highly recommend because it is so much fun, and even though there are challenges, it's pretty laid back. I didn't get a chance to participate in any of the Twitter sprints just because it either didn't work out for me time-wise, or I forgot to turn on the notifications for the Twitter page for the Tome Topple, and so I didn't realize when they were actually doing the Twitter sprints. But I do still think that I was able to interact with enough people through Instagram and even here on YouTube that I don't think I missed out on anything. But that is it for today. As always, links to my other social media accounts are down in the description box, so feel free to check them out if you would like. And until next time, guys, God bless. Bye. No. I didn't like that either. I didn't like that at all. Not one bit.